Hello and welcome to Hot Dipped. We're very blessed today to be joined by the legendary Salisbury varsity football coach, Coach Zech Bowman. How you doing today?
I'm good. Wish I would have brought my boots. You were kind of deep on that with the legendary part. I don't know about that, but I appreciate it.
Boy, I think you're being a bit modest here, sir.
But let's see how this year goes before you start attaching the legendary status to
Well,
me.
I just want to start off with the playing days. I don't know much about your high school career, but what I do know is you were part of a state championship team there at South Cali, right?
No, South Shelby.
South Shelby. I already made a mistake there,
No,
so
no,
the
yeah.
pressure's off you. I'm the one making the mistakes.
No, that's
But
all
tell us
good.
about your team.
So yeah, I graduated from South Shelby High School. I was on their 2006 state championship team. Um, I'll be honest, I was blessed. I had a great coach in Ken O'Laughlin who should be in the Hall of Fame, and um, anybody who is listening to that and has a say on that, they better get his butt in the Hall of Fame or they're going to answer to me. He's still coaching right now. He's actually at North Shelby of all
Oh,
places,
wow.
coaching 8 man and doing a fantastic job there. But I had him and I had some outstanding teammates and coaches. You know, and it really kind of started in 8th grade. We had a fantastic team. When I was in 8th grade, had a good junior high coach that kind of helped set that foundation for us and give us that dream of we could be more than just average players. And my sophomore year, I can remember we were going through probably one of the least fun experiences playing football I ever had. We were a 500 team, and going into districts, and our coach, we had a interesting Monday practice after a tough loss, and it involved a lot of bear crawls. And if
Ooh,
ever done a bear crawl before, you know that when you do 1,000 yards of them, it's not fun.
that's a lot.
And I remember, at the time, as a young kid, you don't really think much of it. But my coach, um, he looked at us and he goes, "If you guys would just listen to this old fart," and he had his finger pointing at him. "If you just listen to me, I can show you how to win." And that stuck with me because I'm the son of a pastor. I'm the son of a preacher, and that's Isaiah. That's the book of Isaiah where God's saying, "If you'll just listen to me, and only do what I tell you to, you'll be rich and you'll eat the good of the land." And that always stuck with me, and that was kind of our launching point from then on out. And then my junior year had a very good team that made the state semifinals, beat Salisbury in the quarterfinal on Monday Night Football. They don't do that anymore. I wish we could go back to that system a little bit. That was fun. Um, Lost a tough semifinal game, and then actually my senior year beat the team that beat us in the state semifinals in overtime, the same way they beat us the year
Wow.
before. So great experience. I got to do it with my brother, who was an all-state linebacker. I had a lot of good players around me and a lot of good friends, good teammates, and good coaches. And um, you know, I was just blessed that I was able to be part of that, and um, blessed that the good Lord gave me ears to hear.
Oh, you bet. So, what position did you play?
I was an offensive lineman. I played center on the offensive line. I was an all-stater at that position, and played defensive line. Played all over the defensive line in the state championship game alone. I played defensive end, defensive tackle, and nose guard.
Wow. Were you tired?
Well, I mean, we only had about 25 guys on the team, and played 4 quarters plus overtime, and I never left the field. So yeah, I was pretty
I
tired.
bet that adrenaline was keeping you going.
Yeah, yeah. At that point, because I used to play in the old dome, in the
Mm-hmm.
Edward Jones Dome, which I don't even know if they still call it that now, where the Battlehawks play. Of course, the Rams played there, and the air in there, it's just stale air. I mean, they say, "Oh, it's 70 degrees." Well, at that time, 70 degrees inside is not pleasant as a football player, especially if you're never leaving the field. So, yeah, at halftime we were a little bit more gassed than we were normally used to, and it was just because of that atmosphere. There's just no air circulation, but it was a great experience, and I'd do it all over again. If you asked me if I wanted to, I would do it all over again.
How would you describe the personality of that team?
um, we were a little bit different in a way. Bunch of grinders, and I would say that that's my personality to this day. Um, we enjoyed doing things as a team. We enjoyed the hard aspects of the game. Um, Really couldn't make us flinch when you threw something hard at us because I mean, we had kind of been through hell in our minds. You talk about 2-a-days and even like back when we first started playing football when we were in seventh grade, we we went defeated, couldn't win a game. We were very bad, and so in our minds there was nothing you could throw at us to face us, and you know, and overall just a bunch of really good guys that um, we cared about each other, and I would also say that our faith also defined us because during that state championship game, there were people constantly praying in that huddle. Now, we're not. I'm not saying that God, caused us to win, but I do believe He allowed us to, stay in it long enough and have the courage to keep going even when things got rough. Because there was one point where we thought we were going to lose that game, and without that faith, I don't think we pull that out. That's just kind of what would define us.
And you already alluded to your coach there that should be in the Hall of Fame, no doubt. How much did his coaching style influence you?
Tremendously. He was very much about the team, and it's easy to get selfish in the game and just focus on my statistics and well, this is not fair. Why am I not getting to play? And it was more of what can I do to make the team better, and can we do this together? Um, and that was like the biggest thing that I always took away from him. And he always inspired us to work hard, and that was probably the thing that I wanted to do as a coach. That I try to model is just that intensity and that attitude and that effort to. I don't care what the score says. I don't care how many people we've got out. We're going to give it our all at all times. And I, to this day, I try to do my best to honor that, and I hope I do. And he tells me he's proud of me. His wife tells me she's proud of me, but she's saying it through him, for him as well. And I hope I do that, and it's that's the main thing, and I'm just so proud and so grateful that I had that type of teacher in the game.
I bet he is proud of you. And then, does he have other people he's coached that have gone on to become coaches? Does he have a coaching tree that's pretty impressive?
I mean, some people might argue it, but I mean, his sons have both been very successful head coaches. There's some other people that have kind of branched off from him. I don't know exactly the whole detail of that, but I know his sons have been very successful. Aaron O'Laughlin, who was at Western for a good period of time, I think Aaron was very successful. I wish Aaron was still coaching to this day, but he's actually coaching with his dad at North Shelby now. His son Luke was the head girls basketball coach at South Shelby for a good number of years, and had a great run. I mean, he's tremendous basketball coach, and I think could have coached football just as well too. Both have very good minds. And there's some others that that have coached for him that I'm not can't come to my mind right now because there's just so many people that made a good impact. But yeah, I mean he's definitely had an impact on a lot of different people. I know that.
Did you always know you wanted to coach football?
No, I did not. It was my junior year. I decided I wanted to coach football. I didn't believe I was good enough to go much further than high school, and then I found out I could because I started getting some college interest. And but I was realistic. I knew the NFL was way out of my grasp, and quite honestly, I didn't necessarily want that, but I knew I wanted to be involved in the game for as long as I could in whatever capacity I could. And it was weird. I actually had a dream of being a junior high coach, which changed in a hurry because I was like, no, I'd rather be up here with these guys. But yeah, I mean, I was 17 when I decided I wanted to be a coach, and especially I wanted to be a head football coach. Just because I saw the way my head coach cared about us and the way he pushed and motivated us, and it was more than just being a coach. And I have a great dad. My dad, tremendous dad, but it was almost like having another dad to kind of kick you in the butt when when you're not listening to your dad. I mean, and it was just tremendous there, and that's really what motivated me to do that.
So did you play college football?
I did. I played at Central Methodist University. Um, Probably the most underwhelming 4 years of my career, but the amount I learned was tremendous. And part of the problem was, what I say was underwhelming as a player. I did start my last year there, but I came in hurt. I had a shoulder injury that kept me out of my freshman year. I had to redshirt, and you play in Class 1 football and you never leave the field. At that time, there's some injuries that you kind of being a tough guy, that you don't know that you carry on for a little bit, and just never really could get my body healthy, and that's what kind of made my playing career in college underwhelming. But learned a tremendous amount at the college level, and I learned that the college level is not always cracked up to be either. People want to say that there's favoritism that happens in high school athletics. I'm telling you, there's not that favoritism in high school athletics. It can be there in the college game too at times, depending on the program. But I mean, it was eye opening in that regard. But like I said, I learned a lot from some good coaches there. I had a D coordinator in Jody Ford, who was the head coach there for a little bit afterwards. Very, very good coach, and just a good person overall. Really taught us how we can care about each other. The man knew a lot of football, but he was all about teaching us how to care about each other first, and that was tremendous. Had other good position coaches there that taught me a lot, but that was the one thing like I always took away from is I learned a little bit of more in depth of the X's and O's, but I also took apart that aspect of you're in charge of people, but now you got to let them know that you care about them. So that was like the one thing I definitely was glad about my college career, and plus I met my wife there.
Well, you can't beat that.
Yeah, she didn't go to CMU, but she's a Fayette girl, and that's a God thing too, because you have to be in the right place at the right time, and if I'm not at CMU, I don't know if I meet her, and definitely was blessed because of that.
You got a degree and a wife. You just can't beat that with a stick.
Yeah, cannot beat that at all.
Good deal. So you're graduating college at CMU. What's your first coaching job?
So I was a volunteer assistant coach at Centralia High School under Earl Bennett. I was teaching in Cairo at the time, but and it just didn't line up to get a teaching job at Centralia and some other places I tried. But thank God Cairo was willing to work with me on, hey, yeah, you can go pursue that and also teach here. They understood what my dream was, and I remember meeting with Earl Bennett, and he was good friends with my head coach. They still are good friends, and he asked me, all right, what do you want from this? And I said, I need somebody to teach me how to be a coach. And I said, not just be a coach, be a head football coach. And he's like, all right, I will take you on. And he told me, he's like, be willing to learn and be willing to be asked stuff, and he asked me all sorts of things, and sometimes he would look at me and grin and go, you're completely wrong there, rookie. And then sometimes he'd say, yeah, you got some good ideas there. And the best part about that was, not only learning from him, there were some great coaches there at Centralia I got to learn from. Jim Newstead, who was their O-line coach and also their offensive coordinator, just super, super brilliant mind. He taught me in a hurry. I don't know football. I thought I came in knowing stuff, and he taught me in a hurry. I don't know anything. And just really good mind. And there was another assistant coach there, Mike Atkinson, just another really good guy, and just, really good football coach. And, like I said, they're all good people. And that's the one thing, like, I feel like I was definitely blessed with. It's like I've always encountered good people. And like I said, there's a ton of others, and just so many there. And I was only there for a year, and then after that, I went to Hallsville for 4 years, and very, very blessed there. I, ran into some more good people there that, helped me further my journey on. And then I was at, I know Salisbury folks don't like to talk about it, but I was at, Harrisburg for 8. And probably the biggest blessing I had was they allowed me to grow up a little bit as a coach and a teacher. I owe a lot to Steve Combs. He gave me a job as a young man, that was probably a little bit on the rough edge side, and he knew that there was some steel that needed to be hot steel that needed to be tempered, and he helped me through that. And then another Steve came along, in the name of Steve Hopkins, who took over the program about year 4 for me there, and led Harrisburg to their first winning season. So I learned a little bit about how to turn losing programs around from him, and that was probably the biggest blessing that I could have had there was him showing up. Another guy that should be in the Hall of Fame, but probably won't get there just for whatever reason. But he definitely deserves to be there because he was just as impactful on me as Earl Bennett or even Coach O. The way he cared about everybody, the way he treated everybody, and the way that he taught the game of football is just, and he still teaches it. He's helping people out here and there, and I know he's teaching his grandson, who he's always so proud of. He talks about his grandson all the time. But it was just a tremendous teacher and a tremendous man, and that really kind of helped propel me into where I am now.
How many years were you at Harrisburg?
I was there for 8 years.
8 years.
Was an assistant, and it's funny. The year before I applied for the job here, I had applied to be the head coach there at Harrisburg, and I was in the final running for it. And that's another thing where I feel like God was saying, "You're ready, but not now.
Mm-hmm.
You're ready, but not now." And they gave it to another guy, Brennan Class. He became one of my good friends. Oh man, I love Brennan. Like, really good guy, really good coach, and he's at Holden now. Just really good guy. And I learned how to support someone that beat me out for a job, and I made it up in my mind, I am going to help this guy be a success. I was like, I am not going to be a problem. I am not going to cause him issues. And I told everybody around me, nobody's causing him issues. And just supported him, and I feel like that kind of, by honoring him, I felt like the good Lord honored me in that regard and helped lead me into where I am now.
You guys had a lot of success at Harrisburg, didn't you?
Yeah, we had a good run there, especially when Coach Hop was there. His first year, which was 2019, we had our first winning season. Beat Paris in Game 10 of districts, which was that was one that would age you a little bit. We had to end up losing our starting running back, his name was Wyatt Robinson, and he was a tremendous athlete. And lost him to a bad ankle injury, lost our backup to a concussion, and we were kind of like down to bare bones there for a little bit, and just hung on to win it at the end. And then made it the next year, made it to a district championship game, lost to Marceline in a pretty tough game, and they end up, I think, going on to state that year.
Wow.
And lost to East Buchanan, that was a pretty good game in and of itself too. And then the year after that, more winning seasons. Probably had our best overall season with like an 8 or 9-2 record or something like that. And then Coach Hopkins last year, we won the conference. We won the Lewis and Clark Conference, and that was tremendous there because that was just another stepping stone that that program had never achieved. And then the next year we didn't have quite a good season. It was 3-7, but we weren't ever really blown out. Our average loss was within 10 points.
Sounds like a fine line between winning and losing a lot of times.
Oh yeah, that football is oval for a reason. I joked with one of the assistant coaches there at Harrisburg that season, and and because we're frustrated. And sometimes all you can do is laugh and joke and go, okay, what's going on? And I said, you remember all those games that were tight the year before that we pulled out when we won conference? I said, there were balls bouncing our way. I said, this year they're bouncing the other way. And that's one thing that, I always made a note of in my mind that, when you're going good, the ball's going to bounce your way. And then there's always an equaling effect. Everything equals out in the end, where there's going to be times where the ball doesn't bounce your way. And that was definitely a year, my last year there, the ball did not bounce our way more times than not. So Yeah.
It feels like there's some life lessons there for your players.
Oh, definitely. I mean, sometimes you can give your best and still not come out on top. Um, and that's okay. I mean, sometimes you gotta learn how to lose. You gotta learn how to fail. And I'll quote my dad. And this drives me nuts. He always said it to me for the longest time. And now I'm quoting him, and I'm quoting other coaches too. He told me one time, failure is not fatal. And I always hated that. I'm like, what the crap does that mean? Like, Dad, come on. I don't need to hear that. Tell me what I want to hear. And you go, no, just because you failed is not the end. It's not failure. It's not fatal. You're going to pick yourself up. You're going to dust yourself off, and you're going to go on. Learn from it. And yeah, that's like you said. That's something that everybody, not even athletes, everybody can learn from that.
One of the reasons I love sports so much is the lessons they teach you. Your dad sounds like a real wise man.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we joke that each of us are a legend in our own mind, but yeah, he definitely is. And he learned a lot from his life too. I mean, especially his mom, my grandmother. Um, that's a story in and of itself that I don't think we got enough time for because that if I told you my dad's story and where he came from and where my grandma came from, you'd go, wow, how did y'all get here? And favor of God is all I can say. Just that favor. So.
Yep. Well, the Lord blesses us all. So fast forward a little bit. You come to Salisbury, and I've really enjoyed watching your teams play. It's been really exciting. How soon after you joined the team at Salisbury did you realize you had something special?
Well, I'd always kind of known that there were athletes there. As an opposing coach, you always know what every school's kind of got, and I had some familiarity with coaching against these kids. You always knew there was something there. And then when I was applying for the job, I really sat down and I was like, okay, I need to know more about these kids. I mean, other than what my scouting report I always had on Saturday mornings would tell me. And as I go through and I just studied each player out. I'm like, okay, if they were a senior, I didn't really pay attention. Wishing some of those seniors could have come back, but at the same time, I'm gonna focus on the ones that are staying. And I noticed just how hard those boys played. And there was flashes of talent. I mean, everybody's got talent potential, and I hate the word potential. It should be a four-letter word that nobody should be allowed to use because it means you haven't done anything yet. And there's a lot of people walking around with potential right now. But I saw that, I just saw the way they were playing. I knew that there were flashes of talent, and I also took time to at other competitions and events where I got to see these kids, compete. I just watched how they behaved and how they carried themselves, and I said, "Those are kids that are great kids." And that was like the number one thing that really kind of drew me here was yes, there's athletes, but there's great kids here, and I honestly almost didn't apply for the job. Um, you get in a spot where you get comfortable, and that was the big thing, and just not quite certain. And my wife, she grabbed me and she grabbed me by the collar and she said, "If you do not apply for this job," she said, "Number one, I'm going to apply for you in your name, and number two, if that doesn't happen, you will regret it for the rest of your life." Because she said, "This is a shot you have to go take." And my wife, she doesn't really pay that much attention to football, but she knew enough to go. And when she heard me talk about the kids and and the program, she said, "This is a shot you need to go take." And I even in 100 years dream that we could get it going this fast? No, I thought, well, this will be a little bit of progress, but it was probably when I realized the type of team we had, it was probably week 4 in year 1 against Harrisburg, when we lost that heartbreaking game where we actually scored a touchdown on the quarterback sneak and didn't get in. They ruled us out, but whatever. But just the heart and determination and just how we didn't back down. And if anybody was there, they knew that was the definition of a hostile environment. And just the way they didn't back down, even when things weren't going good, they didn't back down. And I went, okay, I think we're starting to really turn a corner here. And then when we played Crestridge a few weeks later, there was this look of unsatisfaction on their face, and we had won. And they're like, no, this wasn't good enough. And they went, this we could have played better. And it was a sloppy game on both sides, but they went, no, we're not happy with this. And that's when I knew we've got something. That's a team that wants to be better. And that's when I really knew we got something going good here.
Is it weird to look across the sidelines and see former teams you've played for or coached for that you're competing against?
That first year it was. It was weird. And then this last year, I got over it a little bit. I would say like the toughest thing I found coaching wise, and I was actually talking to Brendan Class about this a few weeks ago. I really don't like coaching against my friends as much as I thought I would. It's the human side of me where I'm a competitor and I want to win, but at the same time, I always feel for my friends at the same time because I know they're working their butts off too, and I know they're trying to do all the things right. And it does like that human side of you that does tug at your heart to know that like I'm just adding to the misery of my friends. And friend of mine who was the head coach at Marceline, Joey Peterson, my first year there, then he resigned. He joked. He said, "It doesn't pay to be your friend." And I go, "Why?" Because everybody coaches their last game somewhere against you. And I went, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean for that to happen." He's a good guy. He was joking, but like I said, you just don't enjoy that part of adding to your friend's misery. But that's just the human side. And then the part of you that gets excited for your boys, knowing that they're just enjoying life and they're learning the game of football and they're having fun playing it. That kind of takes over.
Yep. So how would you describe the personality of last year's Salisbury team?
Again, I don't know if we got enough time, but I would say that we still had that grinder mentality, but they were just confident. I mean, I would say that would be the thing. If you want to talk about confidence without arrogance, that would be how I would define them. Great bunch of kids. And we had great senior leadership. I mean, that senior class, coaches dream about having leadership like that. And it wasn't just one or two guys. I mean, it was that entire senior class. And there were guys that at the end that were speaking up that you didn't expect them to speak up because it was, seniors always get motivated when they see the end drawing near. And they don't ever think that they're going to start getting that tickle in their tummy, knowing that, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this forever. They don't think that that's going to get there. And then when they know that it's that time is short, they start really stepping up and becoming the men that you want them to be. And and that's one thing I can also say, they were men, and they showed what it takes to be a man. Even with the way that the season ended, they showed what a man does, even when it's not going your way, and just super proud of that team. Like I said, confidence without arrogance. That's the way I would define them.
Excellent. Now, talking about the way it ended, that was a interesting night. It was torrential downpour, Putnam County. They seemed like a deep, strong, big team. If I remember correctly, tied at halftime. Was that right?
Yep.
So how would you describe that game?
Honestly, in that game, I felt like we did not play our best. And the boys would tell you the same thing. We did not play our best. Now, did the field and the conditions factor into it a little bit? Yes. But we just did not play our best for whatever reason. And, it happens to everybody. I mean, not many people expected the Knicks to knock off the Spurs, but that definitely showed that on any night, somebody's going to have a bad night. And that was a close game, like you said, and the ball just didn't bounce our way, and we'd get some momentum, and then we'd have an uncharacteristic penalty, or we'd miss a block, and just a lot of things just didn't go our way, and that doesn't take anything away from Putnam County. That was a great football team, and they earned that win. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from them, but we would definitely say we didn't play our best. And their coach has commented to me. He's like, I don't know if it changes the outcome, but definitely would have liked to know what that game turns like on a dry field. I would too. That's all I'm gonna say. I would too, because I know this, that we're not held scoreless if it's on a dry field. But yeah.
I never played football, but I've watched football my entire life, and you had some tremendous speed, especially one guy. But I just have to think that the rain affects speed.
Yeah. And one of the seniors, maybe both two seniors, I forget who it was exactly, but somebody said that you with that game and that field, it was like putting a Ferrari out to race with a mud truck, with that field. Well, who's going to win? I mean, the mud truck's definitely going to win. So I mean, that definitely did factor in. But there was a lot of speed on both sides of the ball too. I mean, that their team was pretty fast too. So you can't say that was the determining factor, definitely. But yeah, we had a tremendous amount of speed, and that probably the fastest team I've ever coached. And I coached at Centralia where we had great athletes. I coached at Hallsville. I coached at Harrisburg where we had good speed some years. But this was probably the fastest team I've ever coached.
It seemed like Putnam County maybe had more players. I wouldn't bank on that, but
oh yeah, they had 45 to 50 kids out.
That's a lot.
That is a lot, and God, I would love to have that, but I'm not going to focus in on that. One of my favorite John Wayne movies is Rio Bravo. I don't know if you've ever seen it. He's got Dean Martin and what's his name? I forget his name. The old man.
I can't recall.
Yeah, I can't recall his name, but there's a scene where Ward Bond's talking to John Wayne, and he goes, "You got a drunk and a crippled old man. That's all you got." And John Wayne goes, "No, that's just what I got."
Right.
So people want to talk about the numbers, and I go, "Well, that's just what we got."
Right. Well, just the reason I asked that question is when you're coaching a football program at a small school like that, what's the ideal number of players to have out for the team? Like, where do you try to land? I know you can't always control that, who's interested and who's going to go out for the team, but what would be ideal?
I mean, like, for me, my goal is to have 10 kids for every class. So that put us at 40. And I think, if you could have somewhere in that 30 to 40 range, that's great. For me, having in the 40s means that we're not playing 2 quarters of JV football, which, I tell people all the time that ask me about why can't we play 4 quarters. Well, you need to talk to Misha about that, number one, because Misha sets our quarter limit and expectations. And number two, like, we just don't have enough kids to, make that viable. Because these kids got to turn around and go to practice the next day. So, I mean, we got to be able to keep kids safe, but also get them the reps that they need. And, like I said, if we could have more kids out, that'd be great. But I'm not going to complain as long as we have the right kids out. That's what we got, and that's all. That's not all we got. That's what we got.
Injuries impact every sport. Yeah. Now, I have to think in football, that's even more so the case. So you have to be able to have the next man ready at all times, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah. In the game of football, you're never going to be 100%. I mean, you can get a kid as close to back to 100%. But there's always going to be something nagging that you play with. I mean, I remember my senior year, I had a hamstring playing baseball. Hurt my hamstring playing baseball, of all things. That really kind of nagged at me throughout the entire year. So, you're never going to be quite 100%. But it's my job as a coach, like you said, it's got to be next man up. And, it's also on the guys behind to be ready. Going back to something else my dad would tell me, because I'd get frustrated in college about, I'd only got in for 2 snaps. Well, hey, you got to be ready to go. You got to be like instant pudding. Be out there, be ready to go, and be good from the get-go. And, that's one thing I will say this is our young kids behind our backups that we've had, they've worked their tails off and they're ready. And, we've had to call on some guys, like last year we lost Caleb Sturm week 5 against Scotland
Tremendous
County.
Player.
Very good player. And Caden Jackson had to step in and play Mike linebacker alongside.
Another great athlete.
Another good athlete. He had to play right alongside there with our All-State linebacker, Isaac Bearden. And, I'd say playing that along with an All-Stater helps, but, those guys had to be ready to step in at that time. We had other guys that, at different times had to step in due to other, different things that happened. So, sometimes it's just all about being ready, because you never know when the opportunity is going to present itself to you.
That's right. So it's early, but do you have any predictions or expectations going into a new season?
I expect us to just do what we always do, give our best, and not back down from anybody. I don't. Predictions are for the weathermen, and I could tell people all the time. They always ask me, well, Coach, how's the game going to go tonight? I said, you're asking me to tell you what high school boys are going to do. I said, that's dangerous. I said, there's a few things in this world I don't predict. I said, what my wife is thinking, what my daughters are thinking, the weather, and what a high school kid is going to do on game night. You don't predict those things. You don't. You try to predict them, you're going to find yourself in trouble.
That there is the essence of why I love talking to coaches, particularly successful ones like yourself, because in business it's the same thing. In any kind of leadership, you cannot control the outcome. What you can do is develop the best process you can and focus on the process, right? And if the process is broken, you fix the process. But it's the process, not the outcome, right? The outcomes take care of themselves, right?
Yeah. And the one thing I tell the boys at all times, like, the scoreboard may not always dictate that we're successful, but I said the things that we can control, it's control what you can control. Well, what can I control during the game? I can control my attitude and my effort. I can always control those two things. I can't control that the ref is going to make a bad call and call you for holding. I can't control that. I can't control that the other team happened to find the right spot in our defense to sneak through and score a touchdown. I can't help that. But if we can control what we can control, we're going to be okay. And I always feel like if we do that, we're always going to be successful, no matter what the scoreboard says. And, going back to the Putnam County game, we couldn't control how the game ended, but we could control our attitude and our effort. And on that night, our attitude and our effort was tremendous, and we still walked off the field successful.
Yep. So over the years, it feels like there's been, for all the right reasons, more of an emphasis on player safety in the game of football. In the time you've played and coached, have you seen any rules changes or just maybe the officiating? Has it changed much, or at high school has it not really changed much in Missouri?
I mean, there's definitely more emphasis on the targeting aspect of leading with the head, which I do feel like that had to be curtailed a little bit, just because there's unnecessary hits that tend to happen from time to time. And it used to be, 30 years ago, they'd say, well, that's just part of the game. Well, when a quarterback's 30 yards out of the play, there's no need to go hit him. That's definitely stuff that definitely needed to be out of the game. And it's funny that you should ask me that. I saw a video on TikTok today that was talking about tackling back when they were showing how they did tackling back when they were wearing leather helmets. It's the same method of tackling that I'm teaching now, and those guys didn't have face masks, and they were keeping the head out of the contact. I mean, it was near hip, near shoulder. What I teach our boys, when we're trying to take the head out of the hit. Well, those guys are doing it too. Tackling, that technique hasn't changed in 100 years, which makes me smile to know that the game is still as safe as it actually ever was. But we're actually trying to eliminate some things that just really don't need to be in there. Now, do I feel like there's some things that we've kind of gone overzealous on? Yeah, but like I've told other people, unfortunately, and this is kind of one where people kind of get touchy. Every coach, for the most part, I'd say, has their players' best interest at heart. But then you get a few guys that make a mistake and just don't think. And then you get a kid hurt or a kid dies. You hear about all the kids that have died on the field due to heat illness or whatever. And that's why we get where we're at, just because somebody didn't think clearly about player safety and made a mistake in that moment. And so, that's where we are in the game. And, you just kind of adjust and go.
It's such a fast-paced game, and everybody could have the best intentions and do everything the right way, and bad injuries could still happen.
Oh yeah, there's no guarantee that I tell people all the time, you're just as likely, if not more likely, to go get in a wreck driving home.
That's right.
That happens more than it does in the game of football. But I mean, it is a violent sport, and it does happen. And like you said, not that anybody's trying to. Sometimes body gets put in a position that's just not supposed to be in. That's not anybody trying to be dirty or malicious or anything like that. It just happens. But I've seen people not near anybody just walking down, walking down the sideline, tear an ACL or tear an Achilles tendon. I mean, you think about like Adam Wainwright or Ryan Howard, who played for the Phillies. They tore their Achilles tendon, and it was a non-contact type injury. I mean, Ryan Howard was going to run out of the batter's box, tore his Achilles. Kobe Bryant tore his Achilles, and it wasn't anything awkward. He just stepped right, and the thing went, well, time to tear. So, I mean, yeah, those injuries happen, and, you try to avoid them. You don't want them to happen, but you got to know that it's going to happen at some point.
That's right. Are you familiar with JT from the Forge, JT's journey, the high school? There's a high school kid from some local-ish high school in Missouri that broke a neck.
Yes.
And so have you ever had to coach a player that's been through a catastrophic injury? And if not, if you were his coach, what would be your words of encouragement to help him through that situation?
Well, I've never had to coach with that type of extent. Thank God, Lord.
Worst nightmare, right?
I'm asking the good Lord now that I never have to experience that anyway. The closest I came was when Isaiah Wales had his really bad injury, his junior year, where he had that really bad leg injury. And I honestly don't have a good answer. I mean, the biggest thing that I could ever tell a kid is, this is not the end, and God makes everything work together for good, and and I'm a big believer that God heals, and if in that situation, I would probably look at that young man and go, God can heal, and God can make sure you walk, whether it's today, tomorrow, or 50 years down the road. Whenever it's going to happen, you'll walk again. I mean, that's the one thing. Like, you have to keep that positivity. I mean, it may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but something good's going to happen to you, and that would be the one thing I would say. And I've actually got to know that young man's story at Palmyra. He stayed so super positive, and that kid had a great attitude anyway. But I think that being positive and upbeat, but also not batting away from, this is the adversity that you're going to face. And because that's one thing, like, I think kids don't ever want, is for you to not tell them the truth. I mean, that that's one thing, like, I've always tried to do in any situation. Yeah, this is what it is, but this is what we're going to do to attack it. And that would be kind of the way I would approach it, honestly.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, because I think that's going to be a similar answer to the next question I'm going to ask you. Whether you're coaching baseball, basketball, football, sometimes you run into situations where parents or the player thinks they deserve more playing time than they're getting, or a different position than they're getting. How do you handle that situation? What's your advice to that player, or the player's parents, maybe more importantly, that really think their kid's not being treated correctly? Like, how should that be handled?
Well, first of all, with a parent, I don't talk about playing time. I will not do that. That is something that I feel like is the young man's responsibility, or the young girl, if I'm coaching a girl sport. Because that's one thing, like, they need to be the one come talk to me and ask, why am I not doing this, or why is that? Because I will explain to them why. I mean, there's times where I've put kids in different spots that they weren't accustomed to playing, and they've asked me, why am I here? And I go, because it helps the team. And I'll explain, this is why. This is the attributes you have that help us here, and this is how I think you can really help us out. And if they want to ask about playing time, which parents, encourage your kids, come talk to their coaches, not just me, any coach. Go tell them. Go ask your coach. And sometimes, as a head coach, and in college, I was told this as well, start with your position coach, because those are the people that, go back to the head coach and give feedback and go, okay, what are you seeing that's keeping me off the field? And also go, not just that, but sometimes just ask, what can I do to be better? I think that's sometimes everybody seems to forget, is that, it's not that we're saying you're a bad person. We're not saying you're a bad athlete. There's just things you need to improve on. And sometimes just asking that, what can I do to be better? That's the thing that I think everybody should always take from. I've had to do it as a coach. I mean, there's been times even as a head coach, I've had to go to my AD and go, okay, you saw this interaction with the ref. I don't feel like it was good. What can I do to be better? And you got to model that as a coach. And I try to model that as best I can. And and that's the thing. Like people got to do. I mean, employees for you. I'm sure they've got to. They need to come to you and go, what can I do to be better? Because I think if you do that, one, that shows maturity and a willingness to do what it takes to get better. And I think if everybody would take that approach, we'd have a whole lot less drama and a whole lot less headaches at times. And unfortunately, I haven't had to deal with that here at Salisbury, but I've dealt with it at other places, and I know that just that simple approach can make things tremendously better.
100%. And in my experience, the most high performing teams I've ever been on tend to be player led teams. It doesn't mean you have anarchy and no leadership at the top, but they tend to own it a little more. Do you agree with that? And if so, how do you foster that environment?
I wholeheartedly agree with that because I mean we talk about last year's team. That was a senior led team, and a player led team, and that's the way that it needs to be. Because I've told my players before. I said, guys, if I have to lead, I'll lead. I'll lead you, but it ain't going to be fun. It's got to be you guys holding each other accountable. And the way that you foster that is you've got to give these kids empowerment to lead. And one thing I always told these seniors last year, and I started with them as juniors, I told them, I said, it is okay for you to get in somebody's face and say, you are not living up to the standard. You've got to do better. I need you to do better. And I said, because if you do that, I will have your back as long as you're doing it the right way. And, you got to teach them how the proper way to lead. You can't go up to somebody and cuss them out and tell them they're no good so-and-so and expect them to follow after you. You got to do it the right way. And that's one thing I tell them. You go up there and you do it the right way, I will have your back. And I think that sometimes helps kids is knowing that, okay, coach is empowering me to do this. He says he has my back. I'll go do this for him. And, I mean, for me, I feel like the results kind of prove out because, like I said, we had a good team last year that was player-led.
No doubt. I feel like it's important for any successful career for an individual to have both a mentor, at least one, and a protege. Now, you've alluded to your coach from high school. Would you say he was a mentor, and do you have others you'd like to thank? And you're still a young man, but do you have any people you consider a protege?
I don't really know if I have any proteges. I have friends.
Yeah.
And I think we all really, really impact each other. I talked about Coach O'Laughlin, who was a tremendous mentor. Jim Newstead and Earl Bennett, tremendous mentors for me. And, to this day, they still check in on me from time to time. And like I said, Steve Hopkins there at Harrisburg. Definitely, there's Coach O and there's Coach Hop, and they're really close together. And those guys have just done so much for me. And like I said, I wouldn't necessarily have proteges. I have friends. I mentioned Brennan Class, who we bounce ideas off of each other when we were coaching together. Now that we're not coaching together and he's not an opponent, we're still bouncing ideas off of each other. I had another friend at Harrisburg, their defensive coordinator and track coach, Blake Logan. He and I sometimes could be like oil and water. But then there were some times we were the right mixture and we worked great, but he challenged me in some different ways that I needed to be challenged, and definitely taught me some things on the strength and conditioning side and how to get kids faster. And I have, two other friends that are head basketball coaches out there. Mason Harden, who's a Harrisburg grad. He was at Madison these last few years. Been through the grind together. We were in the good and the bad at Harrisburg, so we learned a heck of a lot, and stuck together through the thick and the thin. And then my last friend, who's became my best friend instantly, and he's several years younger than me. And some people say that makes him a protege, but I'm like, no, no, he's my brother. I'm not gonna treat him any different. His name is Tanner Smith. He's the head basketball coach at Gallatin,
Nice.
and his dad is in the Hall of Fame as a coach, as a basketball coach, and he played for a guy who's going to be in the Hall of Fame if not now, but very soon. And Todd Dunn, and Todd, his dad coached at Macon for a long time and is in the Hall of Fame. And Tanner hooked me up with Coach Dunn this year, and I got to learn some football from a guy who's won state titles and coached at a very high level. But those are the people that definitely in my coaching career, have made huge impacts on me. And then I'd be in trouble if I don't talk about my wife and my mom and my dad. My wife is the rock star of the family. People, you call me legendary. My wife is legendary because she puts up with me, and two, she manages 4 kids at home.
That's no easy task.
That is no easy task. And we did something crazy. We decided that we were going to move, get a new job, and move. And she still works in Columbia. We live in Fayette, but we moved, and we decided we were going to have our 4th child in the middle of all this chaos. Wow. And that takes a superwoman to say, yeah, let's do all that. And and especially as a head coach, you lose a little bit of job security. Whereas as an assistant, you're kind of stable. But she's definitely the rock star and the legend of our family. I hope she may not ever watch this, but I'm gonna say it now. She's great. And and then I got to talk about my mom and my dad. They've seen me through tough times. They've seen me at my worst, and there was a lot of tough conversations that I've had with them. And I talk about my dad's a minister. Well, I get his best sermons, and sometimes they're not things I want to hear right away, but they're things I need to hear. And they definitely provided that foundation for who I am.
I'm sure they're incredibly proud of you.
Oh, they are. And there's been days I wanted to quit, and those two and my wife, they've grabbed me and they go, nope, you're not going to quit. And just tremendously blessed.
Right on. So you've brought up faith a couple of different times. How important is faith to who you are?
It is what defines me. In all honesty, that it defines me. In Hebrews it says without faith it's impossible to please God. And every game, people will kind of see me go off by myself, and I take my hat off and I pray and I just tell the Lord, whatever I do, let it just be pleasing to you. And that, like I said, it's what defines me. I'm big in faith. I mean, I speak those things that be not as though they were, even if it looks like it's not gonna go my way. I'm not gonna let go until I'm told to. And I've heard someone describe it as bulldog faith. Just that ability, the ability to hold on and just not let go. And that's one thing I can definitely say through the years I've learned, not just from my mom and dad, but through other people I've went to church with and learned from. Is that sometimes you just gotta hold on and let go. I mean, the Bible talks about there was a woman with an issue of blood, and she had to fight through the crowd and grab hold of Jesus' britches just to get her miracle. And I guarantee you, when she grabbed on, she didn't let go for a little bit. And sometimes you got to do that. And that's, like I said, that's what defines me and who I am. And even if there comes a day where they tell me I can't say that and do all that, I'm going to tell them, well, you're going to have to get rid of me then, because I'm not going to deviate.
Yeah. So I bet you don't get much downtime. You're coaching, you got a family of 4, but if you were to get a little downtime or your family had some spare time, how would you guys like to spend that? What does Coach like to do in his downtime?
Oh, yeah, you're right. I don't get a lot of downtime. I love playing with my kids. I adore those kids. I mean, we got 3 girls and a boy.
Nice.
And the boy just turned. His name's Boone. Just turned one back in March, and Aubrey, my oldest, she's 12, going on 30. A lot of spunk and personality. The people of Salisbury have already kind of been um, indoctrinated to her, I guess, so to speak. And Caden's my soon-to-be 8-year-old. She turns 8 this Saturday.
Happy early birthday.
Yeah, happy early birthday to you, honey. She's my sweetheart. She's my buddy. And then I got Isabella, who just turned 5 at the start of the month. We call her the honey badger, and she
Nice.
keeps us on her toes because she is a honey badger in every sense of the word. So play with them, and I'm kind of a nerd. That's probably why me and Mitchell Green get along so good. We're kind of nerdy. We connected on how we enjoy playing video games. So I do tend to play some video games here and there just to kind of decompress. My wife, she finds it funny that I'll be sitting there thinking about football while playing a video game at the same time, and I'm not necessarily playing Madden or anything like that. I'll be playing some off the wall game and just be thinking about football and just kind of processing. And that's kind of I use some different things to kind of help me process, just so that I can decompress, so to speak, and get it out of my system. We do a whole lot of different things, and we talk constantly about, trying to do different fun stuff. And I know my wife gets aggravated with me because there's sometimes I want to be more football focused, and she has to remind me, turn it off. Turn it off. It's
Need that balance.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, we need that balance. And that's one thing I'll say as a head coach I've had to learn is that balance. And I talked about Todd Dunn, and I asked him, I said, all right, you've had a Hall of Fame dad, you grew up in it, and I said, it's not quite the same situation as me, but I said, I'm a head coach now. I said, how do you balance it? And he said, find something away from the game you love to do. So, there's some of those things, and some people don't know this. I paint. I love Bob Ross, and I do a little painting here and there. I haven't done it in a long time.
Future art teacher, maybe?
No. I'll leave that. I'll leave that to the others. No, I don't want to do that. I like what I do right now, but I do paint and do some other stuff. Just mostly just enjoying my family. I think that's the biggest thing that I enjoy doing. And and I talked about those 4 kids. They're tremendous. And then anytime I get to spend with my wife, she's my best friend, and she's definitely the most fun person I get to be around.
That's great. Well, we're about to wrap up, but I'm sure you have some of your current players watching this video. If you wanted to say a few words to those players, what would those words be?
Get ready to work, because we got a lot of work, and they know how I feel about them. I tell them all the time that I love them, and sometimes I look at them and I go, "Have I told you that I love you lately?" And they'll sometimes go, "Yes, coach, you told us 5 minutes ago." It's like, okay, but I'm proud of those kids. We had a camp at Higginsville, and where we got to go up against some different competition, and just super proud of them. And this bunch, they're great kids, and I can't tell them enough. And I hope you guys know that I love you. I'm as I look around and look into the camera and all that, hope they know that I love them, and I'm proud of them, and I'm looking forward to another great year of Salisbury football.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today, Coach Bowman. You have been hot dipped.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for watching Hot Dipped. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on that notification bell for future episodes.